Good morning, everyone. My name is Irene Brinker. I am the CEO and co-founder of Devali. And I do things a little bit differently, so I'm going to ask you all to do me a huge favor and take a look at the person to your right. Now take a look at the person to your left. Statistically speaking, one of the three of you already has at least one form of cardiovascular disease. I hate to do this to you guys, but this is a global statistic. 1 out of 3 adults, approximately 86 people in the United States alone, 86 million people in the United States have at least one type of cardiovascular disease. Every single year, over 735,000 Americans have a heart attack. Over 210,000 of these are repeats. And the cost of treating heart failure in the US ranges over $30 billion, expected over $70 billion by 2030. At the same time, we've bought over $30 billion worth of wearable devices. Over 310 million wearables were sold in 2017. So the question is, why has none of this actually been able to move the needle when it comes to the at-risk population? Well, because bananas don't have heartbeats. I don't know if any of you guys follow social media and you've seen the viral posts where people are using their Apple Watch and their Fitbit and their Garmin to check the heart rate of their banana or their toilet paper. The bottom line is that while their sensors are good and they read things, without having other pieces of information, none of that information is really all that valuable. Data does not live in a vacuum. The truth of the matter is that we have no idea how the human heart really behaves in a real-life setting. So clinically viable data is much more complex in motion. How does a heart behave in the cockpit of a fighter plane, or after running a marathon, or after climbing a mountain? We don't really know, because there is no constant. Everything becomes a variable. If we're comparing this to clinical data, where we have resting patients, standardized temperatures and humidity levels, where the only variable is your heart. Sometimes we like to simulate real life by putting someone on a treadmill and calling that a stress test. But then that variable really becomes the treadmill. Sometimes that data is inconclusive and we send people home wearing a Holter monitor. Has anyone here ever had to wear one? Let's see a show of hands. They're sticky, they're uncomfortable, they're heavy, they get in the way. People don't typically do what they would normally do when they're wearing one. So we're not getting this real life data, but what if we could? What if we could use real-time, interactive data, things like heart rhythm abnormalities and blood oxygen saturation, core body temperature, hydration, stamina, exhaustion, stress, emotions, pain levels, body composition, and sleep patterns? What if we could understand how all of these actually work together to create an entire human? And what if we could do this with a pair of super comfortable Thorlo socks? Or any other garment that chooses to partner with us in the future that has conductive qualities. What if we could then take this data and we can run it through machine learning? What if we had the ability to run that against the clinical data that's already been collected over the past 40 years and start to recognize patterns, create predictive analysis to be able to warn people before an event so maybe they have enough time to change it and never have that event? What if we could? I'd like to introduce you to Devali. We are a wide array of sensors creating on-the-go measurements with more complicated electronic schematics, more flexible algorithms, and complex noise filtration so that we can actually receive clinically viable data in motion, create early warning signs to warn patients, to warn caregivers, so that we can actually do something about events that have yet to occur. Oumen Plus is a collection of sensors, combining fully autonomous electrocardiogram, multi-level PPG sensors, constant heart rate variability, hydration, glucose, body temperature, external temperature and barometer, and the most advanced motion sensor on the market. We're using this to read data ranging from heart rhythm abnormalities and nervous system emotion and productivity states, blood oxygenation, trauma, up to concussions, body temperature and physiological responses to outside temperature conditions, hypothermia, heat stroke, activity, geographic location. But the real benefit here is not just the data that we collect, because again, data for the sake of data is not enough. We are combining data to create actionable, usable insights. For example, high core body temperature plus dehydration, that's heat stroke. Elevated pain levels and impaired sleep quality and reduced physical activity. Wouldn't a doctor who's struggling with understanding when to prescribe opioids and when not to, wouldn't this data be valuable to them so that they could understand that this patient is potentially having chronic pain that's impacting quality of life? That might make that decision easier for that doctor. What about for a cancer patient? Myself as a cancer survivor, I know this one very well. Reduced autonomic nervous system function with elevated core body temperature. That's the sign of an infection. Might that guide someone who's going through treatment to maybe stay home from work today and let their body recover? We're combining this data, and it's a lot of data. So we're also creating customizable user dashboard with multiple user interfaces. To put it in NASA terms, so that an astronaut who's preparing for space can get the data that's most valuable to them, and then a flight surgeon who's deciding which astronauts get to go to space gets the data that's most relevant to them to just make that decision. Alignments with NASA Human Research Program, I don't need to go into detail. Obviously, there are a lot of them. We're both looking for very similar things. That's why we'd like to work with you. Our modular development timeline allows us to develop each module individually so that we can start testing them. In fact, as of January, we would like to start testing Oumen Air for pilot hypoxia. We would love to be testing that with pilots and with your help. Now, because we have our modular development timeline and we're working for commercialization with commercialization partners, we're able to create up into a certain place, get it to the manufacturing standpoint, and then actually work with our partners to bring it to market. The first product we will be releasing is Oumen. Oumen means smart in Bulgarian, by the way, for seniors. We are currently in conversations with one of the largest home security monitoring companies in the United States about potentially working with them as part of their monitoring system for consumers, but we are actively searching for wander management systems already engaged with the senior housing market as a potential commercialization partnership there. Oumen Sport, well, we have a perfect partner with Thorlo as they already own a lot of the hiking and outdoor sport market. They will be handling the commercialization of that, freeing us up to continue our work on Oumen Plus. Oumen Plus for space, for our warfighters, for medical, and for professional sports. Our long-term mission is to use the data that's collected in these areas, obviously with permission of the people who we're collecting data from and no PII, personal identifiable information, so that we could start feeding that through machine learning, so that we could start to recognize patterns and start creating that warning system in advance. If we look at the competitive landscape, there are a lot of companies doing a lot of different things, and some of them are great at one piece or another. We are not a revolutionary technology. We are an evolutionary technology. People are already monitoring the things that we're monitoring. We are just putting them together in a revolutionary way. Sometimes the methods by which we collect that technology is revolutionary, but we are not revolutionizing the methods of the things that we're actually looking to collect. If we look at the size of these markets, I'm not even gonna read these numbers off the screen. We already know that these are gigantic markets, but what you'll see is that they all intersect. We are combining data so that we could cover all of these markets in different pieces and give the people the data that's most relevant to them, their medical staff, the data most relevant to them, and obviously with warfighters and astronauts, we have a whole wealth of information that I think is very valuable. So how do we actually make money? Well, obviously there's device sales, but there's also royalties on partner textile sales, licensing of our intellectual property, as every single module, once it's complete, is open and available depending on who wants it, as long as it fulfills our mission moving the needle towards helping to save lives. Monthly app fees, and the big one is going to be the analytics and risk assessment platform. Now our team, let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, there is not a company in here that doesn't have an amazing team, and we're no different. We have over 25 scientists and engineers with resumes ranging from the Mayo Clinic to Microsoft. But what I think really separates us is that we are planning from the very beginning for commercialization. Myself and Craig Mento, who's here with us today, we both have over 20 years of experience specifically figuring out how to make money in a business. Although I will say Craig is even more accomplished than me. I think my biggest accomplishment personally as a CEO and as a human being is that I have a great habit of surrounding myself with people who are much smarter than me. That brings me to our advisory board. Understanding the gaps that we have in our knowledge, we have built out an advisory board from the very beginning to ensure that we are able to not only seamlessly move into these markets, but be prepared to move into these markets. Our advisory board has amazing people who are dedicated to our company just as we are. People like Don Fowler, the former CEO of Toshiba Medical, to help us conquer that giant medical market. People like Michael No, the former Chief Information Officer of the DoD, to help us understand what we need from a data security and privacy standpoint, not only for consumers, but also to be able to work with the government. We have built out a team, including our amazing strategic partners, Thorlo, the only socks clinically proven to improve foot health. We have our global communications partner, and we're working with the Manufacturing Solutions Center out of North Carolina. Many of you may know them as they've done a lot of work previously with NASA, with the DoD, with Under Armour, and just about every big brand that you can think of. We find ourselves to be extremely lucky to have built such an advisory board and such amazing experience who props us up and helps us develop our plans and strategies. My grandfather used to always say, "Tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are." Who you're surrounded with is who you are. And I have to say that as a 4-month-old company, we're in pretty good company. So how can you help? We want to work with NASA, with flight surgeons, with astronauts, and with pilots in the development of Oumen Air. We're looking to collaborate so that we can start not only testing our product on pilots, but to understand what data is most important and most relevant for all of the stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking for a wander management partner, a company or a few companies already in the senior housing market who do specialize in wander management with the doors. And of course, as with any company here, for the most part, funding is always going to be an issue that we need to consider and that we need to talk about, especially once again as a 4-month-old company. To that, I guess the only question remains, ladies and gentlemen, who of you would like to help us on our mission to save lives? Thank you.
Can you be a little bit more specific about your ask? What are you looking for with regards to funding right now?
With regards to funding, and we can talk about this more at the impact tables, but we are looking for somewhere between $1 and $2 million.
And then as far as the senior living ALC community wander management, do you have anyone on your team that currently is involved in that space? I didn't notice any on your advisory board, but that was part of your go-to-market.
Sure. So we actually are in conversations with one of the largest home security companies that has 3 products that they're already selling in that consumer space for seniors. We are in conversations with several nonprofits who are working to help family caregivers, but definitely an advisor who is specifically in the senior space is another gap that I would love to fill, because that's a really important market where I think we can really do a lot of good.
Hi there. Couple of questions over here. Eyes right. So I want some of these socks myself, but here's a question. My mother-in-law recently fell at home. She lives at home because she won't move anywhere else, and she fell in the kitchen and she'd broken her shoulder very badly. She couldn't get to her cell phone. She couldn't get up. She won't have a panic button because she'll press the panic button to ask where her cell phone is. Would this be useful in that kind of situation for us remotely to be able to say, "Oh, something's happened here. We need to get over there"?
Yes, 100% yes. So I will tell you that, one of the reasons why the senior market is so important is because my father lives in Chicago, I live in Texas, and my sister lives in New York. I get calls from him on a regular basis from his car because it's connected to the phone, asking me in Texas where his phone is. Right? That doesn't really make sense. So clearly, we know that this is an issue, and it's not just an issue for us, right? The SOCs, with our global communication partner, the SOCs themselves are able to contact 911. Not only that, if your mother was, knocked unconscious, the SOCs have the ability to recognize unconsciousness and actually contact first responders as well as contact you. Now, one question that comes up for a lot of people is, how do you avoid false positives here, right? Because we know that a lot of these devices will send out warnings, especially with these senior devices, because the device fell, not the person. Well, that comes back to, the banana with the Apple Watch on it reading a heartbeat, right? It's the combination of sensors that helps us understand, did this person fall? How did they fall? What caused the fall? Are they moving? Are their movements looking like it's pained movements? You will get, if you have the family app, your alert letting you know, and you have the option, depending on the age of the person, what they want to do with the multiple user interfaces, to decide if you would like the SOCs to call 911 on their own.
So how often can you wash the socks?
Great question. So Oumen, our non-medical device, is actually a removable device that fits into a proprietary pocket that we're co-patenting with Thorlo that can then be licensed out to any other garment. So the washing of the socks, you can have multiple pairs of socks because what you're doing is removing the device. But with that being said, how many times can the device itself get washed? Because inevitably, dealing with seniors, especially people who have slight dementia, it's going to get washed. We are making it waterproof, flexible, and comfortable, so if they remember to remove it, that's fine. We don't want to tell them, go ahead and wash it, but if it gets washed, we're estimating probably 50 to 60 washes will still be fine.
Can you go to your timeline slide, please?
Of course. So Oumen is the first non-medical. And this is where we are right now. We've already filed copyrights for our algorithm for core body temperature and our PPG sensor, our optical sensor, for making up for lost skin contact, as well as it's probably the most advanced optical sensor on the market.
How is your IP portfolio comprised? What is it comprised of?
Sure. Right now, we have filed the 2 copyrights, and we are in the process of preparing our provisional patent that we believe will ultimately turn into 5 or 6 patents.
What kind of patent is that? What kind of patent is it? I mean, is it
Provisional?
No, I know it's provisional, but is it like a process patent?
So right now, we are in preparation for it, so we're kind of working on it. I'm happy to talk more about that offline. Or in the impact tables, I should say.
From your algorithm dashboard standpoint, I mean, who on your team is pulling that together, and how do you make decisions on when you want to highlight something's out of range, something you need, when you want to inform somebody?
So if we're thinking about it from the standpoint of the consumer market, consumers will have an app where they have an opportunity to choose what's most important to them. And I see kind of the the app for the astronaut or for the pilot themselves to be very similar. In conversations that I've had with pilots who were trained through PTN with AFWorks, they said that there's so much data that they have to look at that it's really important to them to have something that really streamlines and only gives them what they're interested in, otherwise they won't look at it. So I see that kind of as a drop-down menu where people can choose what's important to them. But for people who obviously, from a medical perspective, are being prescribed for very specific reasons, while they may be able to choose in their own app, the doctor gets the data that they choose. So it's all about choices. The socks themselves, the technology itself, it collects all of the data. It's just the user interface as far as how you put it together.
Do you see this as, and what type of business model do you see it as mainly? Is it like a IP play, build a moat, protect your intellectual property, which doesn't seem realistic at this point? Or is it, like you said, a licensing model, or is it building a brand? I mean, which way do you think is the best way that you think you're going to go?
Sure. In some ways, I know that it sounds like it could be realistic to say D, all of the above, but in some aspects it kind of is, right? So with our modules being independent of each other, the ability to license, even from a modular perspective, our modules into other technologies begins the moment that that particular module is complete and protected. So that could essentially be its own piece. Partnership and creating products that are then commercialized by other companies that already have a strong foothold in that market. But co-branded is also building a brand, but a lot of that legwork is being done by the partners that we're choosing who are already in that market, really drawing down the amount of time to market and the amount of work on our end that's required to go into that market. But we are still branding even if we're co-branding, right? While we are a startup, our plan is much bigger than what you would typically see most startups starting with. But we're doing this in such a way that's really regulated. We have a lot of experience behind us, not only within the startup world, but also from large corporate world as far as how to best try and structure that so that we're not overloaded.
What's the involvement that, if any, that you'll have with the FDA?
With the SBA?
FDA, Food and Drug Administration.
Oh, the FDA. Okay, so for Oumen, the reason that we're releasing the consumer model of Oumen, that does not have to go through FDA. So Oumen Sport and Oumen for Seniors does not require FDA. We're only turning on the medical capability of the same sensors that are in Oumen for the military pilot hypoxia monitor, and that working in small batch testing, we can actually start testing, for example, with NASA or with the US Air Force, kind of as a smaller piece. But ultimately, what we're learning from that is going to go into Oumen Plus. Now, Oumen Plus passed the military applications and small batch testing. This will clearly have to go through the FDA. We are very lucky in the fact that while we know that that's a daunting process, both Don Fowler and Jeff Layton have expressed to us that they have gone through this process many times. And so we're really excited to have their guidance, because I know that with what we're doing, that is going to be a very large project. While we have had some very early conversations, because obviously a number of these are more on the healthcare space, it's a little bit early for us to have the complete FDA strategy, but we are going to have to do that within the next couple months. Thank you.